So my name is Sejal Parekh. I'm a fourth-year medical student at Stanford, and I've been working with Virginia this whole year on this weight management program, this project that I want to tell you about. So I'll start with why did we choose nutrition, and what's my personal interest in nutrition. And so I first got interested in nutrition when I went to college, and right off the bat I gained the freshman 15. So that's traditionally the 15 pounds you gain when you go to college, eat all junk food, that kind of thing. My mom's a pediatrician, and so she saw that I gained the freshman 15 when I came home for Thanksgiving and dragged me to an endocrinologist. The endocrinologist, being an excellent diagnostician, told me that I had to lose weight. And so what's a millennial to do, right? So then I Googled nutrition. Oh, no. Okay. Well, it's a Google search and it says nutrition. And in less than a second, Google gave me 400 million hits. What am I going to do with 400 million different websites about nutrition? And so then I Googled something a little more specific, is how to lose weight. And so that's just circling the 400 million. And so then I Googled how to lose weight. This time I got only 34 million hits. But what was interesting is that it gave me a Jenny Craig that's close to my work and gave me the hours that are open. And so that's interesting. Now we're getting a little more specific, something I can actually do with this information. So then I thought, why not be even more specific? So then I thought, why not be even more specific? And so then I Googled, how should Sejal Parekh lose weight? And predictably, there were no results found. And I think that this points to a broader picture, which is that there's a lot of information about weight loss and nutrition out there, but despite that, 2 out of 3 Americans are still overweight and obese. So there has to be some breakdown. This information we have isn't getting translated to patient care. So how do we fix this? Or do we just start pumping metformin into the water? And so this is the origin story for the project that I worked on this year, is how do we give specific patient-oriented weight loss information. And so now I'm going to go over the timeline of this project. We started with a needs assessment. That was in the beginning part of the year. Then we planned the project, and we're currently in the creation and evaluation phase of this project. And so let me talk to you about the needs assessment, or what we learned. So these are the people that were interviewed. We had 17 semi-structured interviews that lasted about half an hour each, with everyone, with all these different groups represented. I talked to a lot of you in this room, so I'm really appreciative of your feedback. And the data gathered from these interviews kind of naturally fell into 2 categories. So one category was, what are the current gaps? What is the breakdown we see in our clinics or in our trainee education of why nutrition information isn't getting translated into patient-specific recommendations? And so the first thing that came up is trainee knowledge gaps. And trainee knowledge gaps fall into 3 main categories. One is content knowledge, the second is cultural competency, and the third is a language problem. How do trainees actually talk to patients about weight loss? And so with content knowledge, there's no formal nutrition curricula that all residencies adhere to. There are guidelines as to what residents should know, but there's no codified curricula. And so there's natural variability in what different residents and trainees are aware of in terms of nutrition training. The second thing is that within content knowledge for trainees, in residency programs, there is an emphasis on disease-specific nutrition or complex nutrition. So how do we treat heart patients? How do we treat kidney patients? And what can liver patients eat or not eat? That's relevant for probably 25% of patients that walk into the general practitioner's office. 75% of patients just need general nutrition education. So that's portion size control, that's what are changes you can make in your daily life to be healthier. They don't necessarily need artificial nutrition, which is what residents are typically trained in. So that's something to remember, that a lot of nutrition education needed by patients is kind of generic information, or how do we translate these common beliefs? So how do we translate what we know is good, such as fruits and vegetables? How do we get that to patients more? The second thing that trainees tend to lack is cultural competency, and that was a theme that was echoed in a lot of the interviews that I conducted. Is, do our trainees know how to help our Asian and Hispanic patients eat healthier within their cultural norms? And so that was a big point. That's something we wanted to focus on in this project. And the last thing that I thought was probably most interesting to me is, do our trainees, do our family medicine residents and PA and NP students, do they know what words to use, how to talk to patients without offending patients about weight management, without offending parents of obese children? Do they know what words to use and how to communicate these topics that are hard to talk about, that are tied to a lot of emotional habits? And so that was interesting to me. And so the next big category that came across in this current gaps was structural barriers. And these are things such as patients not being able to make it to appointments, patients not having time off from their work to make it to appointments, and co-payment costs, things like that. Things that are unfortunately built into our healthcare system that our project wasn't going to be able to address. The next big category that came, and then patient knowledge gaps, and this is patients being on fat diets that they might not know about. I know the ketone diet is really popular right now, and so how much do we understand, how much do patients understand about what that actually does to the body? So this is, again, these are the current gaps that are preventing nutrition recommendations from translating into patient care, and this theme came across in the needs assessment interviews. The next big theme that came across is what should an intervention look like? And so what an intervention to help more nutrition information get across to patients should look like, there was a cautionary note. And the cautionary note is that there are many existing resources, that there are efficient referral systems in place, and there's lots of local variability in patient population and resources. So whatever our project was trying to create should take that into account, should be aware of all these resources that are already out there. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. And then the next thing that came across is keys for success. How do we make a project successful in this space? So future interventions should be longitudinal to have some sticking power. One noon conference isn't enough for trainees to be experts in nutrition. One day of teaching kitchens, demos, and things like that is also not enough. Whatever our project has to be, it has to be longitudinal. It has to have buy-in from training programs. So now I've told you the origin story, and I've told you what this project should or shouldn't be. And so now let me tell you what the project is. And so the project that we decided on creating is a podcast series. And the podcast series is titled Precision Bites, Talking with Patients About Weight Management. The name comes from a combination of precision medicine, so medicine tailored to each person, and bites for the nutrition part. And as the title suggests, we really wanted to focus on the communication aspect. What words to use, what questions to ask, how to really engage the patient in these sorts of interactions. And so this podcast series is a series of simulated clinical encounters. So there's an actor playing the doctor, an actor playing the patient, and a narrator, that's me, in different scenarios, in different social contexts, talking about weight management. And so I'll put a list up here in a minute, but the topics we cover in this podcast series is how to counsel a poor patient about weight management, how to counsel a homeless patient about weight management, how to counsel opioid-dependent patients about weight management. A lot of the complex issues that really get in the way of patients being healthy. And so now I'm going to talk about what kinds of things we wanted to include in the podcast. So I've been talking a lot about communication, and just to formalize it, we really talk about motivational interviewing. How do you get patients to understand their motivations, their fears and hopes, and translate that into patient care, into specific recommendations that patients are likely to carry out. We also, in the podcast series, review the literature surrounding these issues. So we talk a little bit about brain biology and satiety and how opioids affect hunger. We talk about pediatric obesity and what are the foods targeted to children, marketed to children, that we need to be aware of. And finally, we have some nutrition tips and techniques. So what are the practical things you can tell your homeless patient about where to find food and what foods they should be eating and how to prepare food without a kitchen? So we wanted to include all these things to prepare trainees to talk to their patients about weight management. To get some buy-in from residency programs, we align a lot of the podcast teaching pearls and teaching goals with the curriculum guidelines or recommendations for family medicine residents. And so that's the nice thing about these podcasts that's really to sell to residency programs, which is we will hit a lot of these competencies that you need your residents to be fluent in this podcast series. So it's an adjunct teaching tool. Another thing we wanted to do to get buy-in from residents is to keep it realistic. I think that there's a lot of nutrition information out there that oversimplifies the realities of weight loss. And so it's one thing to have a simulated encounter where the provider tells the patient they need to lose weight and the patient is really excited, has all the means to lose the weight, and has a plan. That almost never happens. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this problem. And so we really wanted to include the social context of the patient and the other comorbidities that stop them, that hinder them from losing weight. And so that's why we wanted to keep it realistic and have all these niche topics. So this is some more specs about the podcast series. It's 9 episodes. Season 1 is 9 episodes. Podcasts are 25 to 50 minutes long. And I know that sounds on the longer side, but that's the beauty of a podcast. You listen to it in the car on your way to work. You listen to it while you're at the gym. You listen to it while you grocery shop. The nice thing about having only audio is that you can easily multitask. And so I was really interested in the podcast format because that's what I use. That's what a lot of my friends use to read books or listen to talks or things like that, is that it's nice to have just an audio format. And it's a lot easier to create too. So there's a portion, so each podcast is broken up into five or six sections. One with each section has a 2 to 3 minute interview excerpt between the doctor and the actor patient. And then I do a narration of clinical pearls after each 2 to 3 minutes to break down what the provider and patient were talking about. And finally, it's aimed at residents and trainees, so this is primarily for family medicine residents, PAs, and P students, but of course it's open access, it's available to everyone. So it's open to clinicians who've been practicing forever and just are interested or want to know what else is out there. And it's open access, and that's really nice. And so what that means is that if you go on your phone right now, you can find it, and you can listen to it on your drive home or your drive to the airport. And it's also, so it's on iTunes, so anyone with an iPhone has access to it. And it's on SoundCloud, which is an open access site, so it doesn't matter what kind of phone you have, you can still listen to it. And so, so I wanted to show a list of the topics. And these are the topics that we've planned. And so episodes 1 and 2 are out. So how to talk to the obese child from an obese family is up there. How to talk to the opioid-dependent patient is also out there. The next 7 episodes have been taped and are in post-production, if you will. And so we're really excited to get some of those out as well. So I want to give you a minute just to look at these topics and see, is this something you think would be applicable in your area, for your clinicians? You know, are these topics helpful? Sorry. And so, what I wanted to do is play a section of the podcast for you. It's a 5-minute clip, and during this time, I really encourage you to do something else. Check your text messages, check your emails. I want to demonstrate that this is something you can easily multitask. You can have it going on in the background, pick up the pearls, while you're actively doing other things. And so, let me transition to the website so I can pull it up, and feel free to subscribe right now if you're interested. Alright, so we're going to start from the beginning of episode 1, talking with the obese child and obese mom.
Hi everyone, my name is Sejal Parekh and I'll be your host today. Welcome.
Can everyone hear that?
Welcome to our podcast, Precision Bites, talking with patients about weight management. This is a podcast series of simulated clinic encounters dealing with motivational interviewing and weight management in different social contexts. Today, the provider is talking with Alex, a 12-year-old boy and his mom. Alex's BMI has been in the 95th percentile for a couple visits now, so the provider called him and his mom back for a weight follow-up. Of note, the whole family sees the provider: mom, dad, brother, everyone. And all members of this family are obese. Part 1, Encountering Resistance.
Hi Alex, how are you today?
Good.
Great. Who have you brought with you today?
Mom.
Hi Mom, how are you?
Hi, Doctor. So you asked us to come back for another visit? At his physical, you said you wanted to talk about Alex's weight. What's wrong with his weight?
Yeah, thanks for coming in. So, I record Alex's weight every time he comes to see me. And I've been seeing a trend that I wanted to talk to you about. What do you think about Alex's weight?
I think he's fine. Big and healthy, the way kids should be.
Yes, Alex is a great kid. But I wanted to talk to you today because Alex's BMI has been greater than the 95th percentile for his weight for his last 3 visits.
Wait. What's BMI?
BMI tells you how your weight compares to your height. So, for example, most people who are 5 feet tall should weigh a certain amount to be healthy.
Oh.
Wait, I thought BMI was a number.
Yeah, you're right that BMI is a number for adults. Since kids change so much as they grow, we don't give them a BMI number per se, but a percentile comparing them to the average kid. So the average kid will be 50th percentile.
So isn't 95th percentile good? He's close to the top.
Well, remember, BMI takes into account weight for Alex's height, so he weighs more than 95% of other kids his height.
Pearl 1, Encountering Resistance.
So that gives you a short snippet of the interview. And so we had 3 actors, the provider, Alex, and mom. And now I'm going to do a short narration about the key topics in that part of the encounter.
Opening the encounter about a child's weight can be tricky. 2 major challenges in this part of the encounter are 1, speaking the same language, and 2, preconceived notions. So, speaking the same language means that the patient and their family know what you want to talk about and understand the words you're using. Be upfront about why the patient is called back into your clinic. Don't forget to communicate key information, such as current BMI and recent weight trends. One study compared doctors' progress notes to audio tape patient encounters in a pediatric weight clinic. This study found that 15% of the time, doctors did not assess the patient's BMI or communicate this information to the patient. Also, while most patients understand words like healthy and unhealthy, BMI percentiles can be tricky. You can explain these words in a sentence or 2 and set a good tone for the rest of the meeting. Remember to speak the same language, let the patient know what you want to talk about, and explain your terms. The second major challenge is preconceived notions about health. This is one of the main challenges of pediatrics, and specifically when talking about kids' weight. It is critical to understand that almost universally, thin kids are thought to be unhealthy or malnourished. What parents think of as healthy can be much higher than a normal BMI. In fact, a meta-analysis in 2014 reviewed about 70 studies that enrolled more than 15,000 kids and parents. The meta-analysis showed that about half of parents underestimated their child's weight when the child was overweight or obese, and many parents misidentified a normal weight. This is important because providers can be susceptible to these unconscious biases as well. Remember, the visual BMI, or the child's weight just based on the appearance, is often wrong. We encourage you to evaluate and communicate numbers such as BMI points and percentiles. The CDC classifies kids in the 85th to 95th BMI percentile as at risk of being overweight, and kids greater than the 95th BMI percentile as overweight. Finally, many providers worry about offending parents and children or causing children to worry too much about their weight. In a study of over 400 parents, researchers found that parents react better to phrases such as unhealthy weight and unhealthy BMI, and worse to words like heavy, cuddly, chubby, extremely obese, and fat. Remember to emphasize that you care about the child's health and not their appearance. You won't offend anyone if you're sensitive in your wording, emphasize health over looks, and keep it fact-oriented. Part 2, involving the patient.
Okay, I see what your graph says, but Alex looks fine to me. I look just like that at his age.
So that's the section I wanted to play for you. And so we saw that there was a little bit of an encounter, and I wanted to make it realistic. So Mom pushes back. She says, well, I know what your graph says, but I think he's fine. And that's what a lot of clinicians hear on their day-to-day basis, is this kind of pushback, these preconceived notions about health. And so the rest of the interview goes on to talk more about that, does some motivational interviewing, does a specific diet history for pediatric obesity specifically, and then comes up with some changes. And so those are the 5 parts of this podcast. And so, back to the presentation here. And so these are the topics, as I said, that we're going to be rolling out. This is our logo, Precision Bites. So if you're looking online, this is us. So go ahead and subscribe to Precision Bites. The podcasts are available now. Feel free to do it on your phone as I talk. And these are all the different times you can listen to the podcast. So it's really meant to be mobile and flexible. And so the next part is dissemination. How do we plan to get this podcast in the hands of people who need it? So residents and students, and anyone interested in nutrition counseling. And so what I've done over the last month is I've reached out to all the residency programs in a 2-hour driving radius from Stanford to see if I could go for a noon conference or didactic time to talk about weight management and this podcast. And so I was able to go to 4 residency programs, and I'll show you that information in a minute. We're also hoping to disseminate this podcast in a company toolkit through our friends at CPCA and AHEC here. In the Western Region Public Health Training Centers, which is what this webinar is for. We are hopefully we're planning on an upcoming publication as well. And the last thing is we're hoping to disseminate this organically. So through our personal networks. So that's a dissemination plan. And this is cool. This is dissemination, the first 30 days. So we started this channel up, I think, 28 days ago, and had some test podcasts, and then have released it out in the world. And the website I'm using, SoundCloud, is open access. Anyone can sign up for an account and upload podcasts or music or anything on there. But the thing that's really cool is that you get great usage data. So I know how many times this podcast or these episodes have been listened to, where the listeners are, what device the listeners are using, and that kind of granularity of data is really cool, and it can really guide what we do in the future. And so what this chart is showing is how many times each podcast was played each day over the last month. So we've had 90 listens in the last month, and this information is really cool too. This is showing, it's a little fuzzy, but what this is showing is the top cities that our listeners are in, the top countries our listeners are in. This podcast has gone international with a couple of listeners in India and the UK, and Ireland and Australia, in fact. And what devices listeners are using. So are they on iPhone? Are they on their iTunes? Or are they on iPhones? Or are they listening over the web? So how are they getting this information? So I just want to pause for a minute to let that sink in. We have a lot of granularity of data when we do things like this, when we upload podcasts on these kinds of websites that track where people are listening. So of course, most listens at Stanford, as I bug all my friends to listen to this, but also we have the places that I went to go present this podcast is at San Francisco, Modesto, Sacramento, and San Francisco. So those are some of the higher listened areas. Okay, so this is what I was talking about, the residency presentation. So I went to go speak at 4 residencies in kind of the Bay Area to advertise this podcast and what it can do for residents. And so I went to a program in Modesto called Valley Consortium of Medical Education. I went to UC Davis, UCSF Fresno, and UCSF up in San Francisco. And these are the number of attendees at each of these lectures. 2 were at didactic time, so at dedicated teaching times for residents, that they should all be there. And 2 were at noon conferences, and so you can kind of see the breakdown. And this slide is interesting. And so what we did is that at the beginning of the presentation, we did a pre-survey, gathering demographic information, and assessing residents' skills, attitudes, and knowledge about weight management, counseling. And then we did the presentation, played a part of the podcast, and then we did a post-survey of anticipated impact. So how likely are you to use this podcast? And so I'm going to go over the demographic and initial evaluation. So initially we had 26 people, 60% female, 23% male. The first pie chart is showing you what year in training these residents were. So they're mainly second-year students, second-year residents. The smallest category was the first years, and that's most likely because they were on inpatient or heavy rotation, so they can't get away from. And then we had third years there as well, and so they're at the top of the totem pole in terms of residency. This is the pie chart I really want to focus on, the second one, the length of prior nutrition training. The question that was asked was, up till now, how many hours of formal didactic training have you had in weight management counseling? The options were 0 to 5 hours, the first category, 5 to 15 hours, the second category. Third category was 15 to 25, and then we went 25 to 35, 35 to 50, and 50 plus, to account for anyone who might have had a prior career in nutrition. And I just want to focus on that second pie chart, which is half of all residents had 0 to 5 hours of formalized training in weight management. How can we expect our residents to be superstars at this if on average they're getting 2 to 3 hours of training in their whole careers? Is that a fair ask? And so I think what this demonstrates is a need. Is a need for some training, is a need for training to fit residents' lifestyles so they're more likely to do it. So just wanted to focus on that. The next set of slides are the self-reported attitudes, knowledge, and skill in weight management counseling. So what this slide is showing is the self-reported attitudes that residents have towards weight management. The questions are, 1, I am very interested in learning about counseling my patients about weight management. The second question is, doctors can influence their patients' weight. And the third question is that weight management counseling is an important part of the family medicine doctor's job. And I think this slide is really heartening. The green part is strongly agree. We did a 4-point Likert scale. So the green part is strongly agree. The red part is agree. The blue part is disagree. And then no one put strongly disagree. So that was great. But I think that this means that residents are open to learning more about weight management counseling as long as it fits in their lives. Because there is, residents have positive attitudes towards this topic. The second set of questions were about knowledge. How much do you know about weight management counseling? And so question 1 says, I know quite a bit about effective weight management counseling. And question 2 says, I know how to talk to my patients to improve their weight management skills. And I think this question is interesting. These set of questions are interesting because you see a split. When asked, I know quite a bit about weight management, residents are more likely to say disagree. But when asked, I know how to talk to my patients about weight management, most residents agree. And so this is interesting. I think that what this means is that our needs assessment and our evaluation line up. Maybe residents think they're better at talking to their patients about weight management than they are, or maybe evaluators and preceptors don't think that trainees are as great about talking to their patients about weight management. So there's some discrepancy.
I have a quick question on that.
Sure.
The slides where you showed the 0 to 5 or 15
Yeah.
to 25, I saw that the increase was in the second year residents, so they spent the larger portion of time learning about nutrition.
No, so the first pie chart.
The second pie chart.
Right, the second pie chart The colors are just according to that part. They don't correspond to which were the second years and which were the first years. The reason I thought that the second pie chart was most interesting is because that didn't change amongst the first, second, or third years. So there wasn't like the third years had the highest percentage of nutrition training. I thought that was really
I just
interesting.
thought that my correlation was that those second years answer that they feel comfortable about.
Right. So I should have labeled it more clearly. That's not, the colors in both pie charts are not representing the same thing. But I'm just saying that from my review of the evaluations, there was no difference in what each year had the formal hours of didactics. So the next slide I think is the most interesting, and I think that's the one that we should all pay attention to the most. And this is a question about efficacy. So self-reported resident efficacy. The questions here are, I'm easily able to assess family relationships and dynamics to identify positive, negative health influences. The second question is personalizing weight management recommendations for a patient's age, ethnicity, and social context is easy for me. Third question is, I'm capable of developing and implementing a weight management plan with my patients. And the fourth question is, I'm comfortable counseling all my patients about weight management. And here, these are the questions that give us the highest percentage of disagrees. So while residents have positive attitudes towards learning about weight management, and they feel like they have the content knowledge, they don't feel efficacious. They don't feel like what they know is translating to something, is doing something for their patients. And I think that's really provides a space for podcasts like these, for interventions like these that help residents talk specifically to their patients. So I'm just going to pause here. This is kind of the last of the graph charts, the graphs that I show. Are there any questions about these?
Not a question, just kind of an observation. I think a lot of family medicine, some of the questions where there seems to be kind of a disconnect between, I know what I need to say, or I know about, I have a high knowledge of weight management planning versus I'm comfortable talking to my patients about weight, that disconnect. Well, that I think kind of reflects just the family medicine's ability to just kind of communicate and have a discussion with the patient.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, like, if I guess it is a question. I'm wondering if the discussion that the residents are having with the patient, see if I can articulate this, that they're comfortable talking with their patients. Do they see that? Do they feel that part of their conversation with them is effective or is useful? I guess what I'm trying to say is how do you explain, I guess, the notion that they're very comfortable talking to their patients about weight loss, yet don't know anything about weight loss? To say it bluntly, right?
Right. Or measure the impact, right?
That's a great point.
So ignore what I said for the first 30 seconds, just ask the question.
Yeah. That's a great point, and I think that's the question, is why do residents feel comfortable in weight loss counseling, but not feel efficacious in weight loss counseling? Those two seem to be counterintuitive. How do you feel like you know everything about this and can't do it? And I think that question comes down to the communication part, is that I know what my patients need to do and I know what to say, but something is stopping me from translating that into something effective for them to do. And so what we did is we did an informal debrief session after a lot of these interviews, where I asked residents when I went to present, what have been your experiences with weight loss? Are your patients successful when you counsel them? Kind of what actually happens? And so what most residents told me is that they'll have two patients who are rock stars out of their panel of, however many hundreds. They have two patients that are really good and follow directions and, do all these things that really help them lose weight, and that those two are the shining example then for the rest of the residents' panels, and those are the two examples that the resident brings up over and over again. Oh, my patient lost a ton of weight doing X, Y, Z, you know? And so I think what that means is that the nutrition advice or the weight management advice that residents feel comfortable giving is not necessarily tailored to each patient experience, and that's why it's not as effective. And so that's why I think you see the highest disagrees, the number of disagrees in the, can I personalize this information? Can I develop and implement this plan? Yeah.
Thank you, this is really super information. And I think that one of the things that it just brings to mind, I think that I was looking at this in ways too, is that there's so many competing priorities for residents.
Yeah.
How much time you got in continuity clinic?
Yeah.
I have 20 minutes to be with this patient.
Mm-hmm.
I've got this complicated diabetic, you know, give me a break. You know, I mean, there's just so many other things.
Yeah.
And if you're dealing with the pediatric population where you actually have the pre-diabetic or the people at risk, you have a different way that you can probably approach this than you do with somebody who's in what they call tertiary prevention, where they're already got the chronic illness or trying to help them not get worse, or even secondary prevention where somebody's pre-diabetic, et cetera. So I think that one of the things that always comes to mind is, number one, we're not in value-based care. We're actually in how many patients can I see at the end of the day, and I have the continuity clinic that I have to take care of. I'm an academic center where I don't actually have to actually see X number of patients, but I still have these patients that are, you know, there's a demand that I've got to see 9, 12 patients in the clinic.
Mm-hmm.
That's one. The other is you're siloed. You know, you're not actually dealing with the health educators and the people that are actually who do this in a group setting and with peer counseling that actually can actually help to promote the successes, you know?
Yeah, so I totally agree. I think those are probably the two main issues when it comes to translating nutrition advice to patient-specific recommendations. Just to answer that point really quickly, one of the things we try to do in this podcast is make it realistic. So all the interview portion, the patient encounter, is usually 10 to 15 minutes. It ends up being longer because of my narration, but we put in lots of tips on how to pare down the time it takes. So how do you take an efficient diet history that's actionable? You know, it's fine if the patient has fruit at breakfast and at lunch, but where are the areas to cut down snacks? How do you zone in on those areas really quickly? And the second thing we did was we did a suspension of disbelief that in all of these podcast episodes, the provider is the only one. There isn't a social worker, there's not a care coordinator, there's not all these extra personnel to pick up the slack. And unfortunately, that is a reality in a lot of underserved areas. And so we really wanted to tailor these podcasts to that. So we talk about public assistance. We talk about what are the other resources out there that providers should know about, just in case, they don't have the backup support of a team. So both of those are great points. Those are the problems in a lot of these clinics. And we tried to get to them as much as we could in the podcast series. Mm-hmm.
Just some constructive feedback.
Yeah.
Very good podcast and good presentation. But I would highly recommend, if you can, the cultural competency piece is extremely important to address, because everything from my perspective, would cascade underneath.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a way to move the 8 and 9 versions of the podcast up and actually showcase those first so that people can have an understanding of how they're dealing with different populations and different cultural groups. Because the conversation that you're going to have with folks regarding obesity is going to be very different in the Latino community as it is with the Asian American community. So having that fundamental understanding and also help break down how you communicate those are the elements.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. I think that not only are the medical issues different in subpopulations, but so are the family structures, so is the actual food that people are interested in eating. And it pervades all aspects of what we can intervene, what we can do as providers. And so as soon as those are ready to go, they will be at the top of the list. That's a great point.
I'm just wondering, well, first of all, I'm going to agree with Ozzy. My first job out of college was as a nutrition counselor. I studied nutrition in college. And it was eye-opening to me to have all this information and learn all this great stuff, and then go to a community that I didn't know and be faced with that reality, which just completely changes how you're going to do things.
Yeah.
And I was at a health center, and I did recognize that among the clinical staff, there was such a varying capacity in each person to address any of this. And so to sort of start with residents and try and make headway there, I think that's so wonderful. My question though is, in college when we were learning about this, it was so discouraging to me, maybe to some people it'd be encouraging, discouraging to me to know that when you're looking at weight management interventions or weight loss, and you look at how people can be successful after 1 or 2 years, but if you look 10 years down the line, it's like a statistical anomaly for people to keep weight off.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, like, what's your goal, what's your expectation that these residents, if they're getting this information, like, what is the end goal for them in being effective in managing their patients?
That's a great point. So first of all, right, so when you look at the epidemiology of obesity and weight loss, we haven't found great silver bullets. The closest thing we found is bariatric surgery, and that's not all patients are candidates for that, not all patients should be candidates for that. So when it comes to what is the ultimate goal of something like this podcast, I think personally what I'm hoping for this to be is get residents more informed about the specific social context or the specific comorbidities that accompany weight loss, and for residents to feel more comfortable in the resources that they know about and the language that they use to talk about it. I think that weight loss is a huge problem, but I think that the area I really wanted to focus on is how comfortable do providers feel talking about this issue. Because I think it's a systems level issue, right? It has to do with food policy and green spaces, and there's all these things that factor into weight loss. And from where I stand, you have to pick up a part of the puzzle. You can't fix everything at once, you focus on one piece. So that's my personal goal for the podcast.
I think it is a great example of social determinants of health involved, for sure, because there are other cultural issues, there are the food swamps, food deserts, all these places where people can't, without the kind of help from us to say how important this is, and how do you avoid sugars, added beverages, these problems, just having that education just being brought out more and more down the road. It also feels like, in a way, this is like 10, 15, 20 years behind when tobacco was, so
Yep.
and how did that finally happen? Well, partly it's legislation.
Yeah.
Lots of legislation and no work at all. And we can do the same thing with sugar-added beverages, for example, eventually, and that's a big deal. And hopefully it's going to be legislated again, come back over and over and over until something happens. But the more that kids get this information and that they actually start sort of living it, what, my parents smoke it close, so that when you actually can see that, instead of having that Coca-Cola or that whatever, that kids can learn that water is what I really need to get, say, healthy and back to food. And becomes part of the social fabric, right? And I think that's one that certainly we're doing.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to add on that I think another component of this is, like, if we're truly trying to make it patient-centered and that person right there, like, examining our own biases when we walk into that room, that there's a person who doesn't have a home, doesn't have access to food, and if we get them eating, saltine, or not saltine, not an example, but like a cracker versus Cheetos, like, that's progress. It may not be, eating kale and quinoa salad, but just kind of understanding, because I think a lot of patients feel judged when they come into that conversation. Like, it's already starting at this, like, cowboys at sunset kind of conversation, and so really examining our own biases before we enter into that conversation is important.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. That's a segue into something I wanted to highlight. And so like I said, I wanted these podcasts to be realistic. So our providers, our actor providers, don't tell patients to eat kale. They don't tell our patients to cook small batches of quinoa multiple times throughout the day. That's not the type of advice we're giving. And I just want to point this out, that in the episode with the poor patient, we talk about frozen vegetables and frozen versus fresh and how much nutrients you lose and why one's better than the other. In the podcast about the patient with multiple prior attempts to lose weight, we talk about the emotional underpinnings of the weight loss cycle. In the podcast about the homeless patient, we talk about what are great places to get food, what food banks have fresh foods, how can you really prepare food without a kitchen with 2 utensils, with a can opener and a Tupperware box. So I want to emphasize that all of these, we try to keep them as realistic as possible. No single mom of 2 preteens who works 3 jobs is going to have time to make salad every day. It's not going to happen. I can't even do it and I have no responsibilities. And so the point is, we really wanted to keep it realistic. What are things that can actually translate to things patients can do? And so I thought that was a great point about what are our biases going into the room. And I wanted to emphasize that the pearls in these podcasts, I hope, are very actionable, are very doable. Okay, well, I'm going to try to wrap it up. So let's skip ahead to the slides it was on. Okay, great. So we went through these, and this is one of the last slides, which is the anticipated impact. So when residents were asked, how likely are you to listen to this podcast? Most of them agreed. There were a couple that were honest, and we appreciate that said they're not likely to listen to this podcast. But it is heartening that all residents either agreed or strongly agreed that these types of podcasts would help them in counseling their patients about weight management. And so that was great to see, that residents have positive attitudes towards some type of intervention like this, that there's a space to create here. The last part is this toolkit, and this is your paper takeaway from this session. So along with the 9 podcast episodes, we're creating a toolkit that highlights the clinical pearls in each of the podcasts. So if you don't have time to listen to this, or you're not very audio-oriented person, you can flip through this toolkit. All the pearls are bolded, so you can quickly review what to focus on in the encounter, and it also has the citations and all the studies in there as well. So it's 7 pages, and that's something you can flip through. We're going to make a chapter like this for each podcast. It's something it's a different format, it's a different medium to get a lot of the same information.
So, well, that, like for people that are, not stable, obviously, listening to the podcast, will they be able to download this? Like the site?
Yeah. So this.
We'll have that on the website. Download it.
The toolkit will be posted, so that'll be able to be downloaded. The podcasts are all online; you can download them, and they'll be posted as well to the sites. So, just a quick outline if you don't want to flip through the pages of what are the things we talk about. So in Pearl 1, the first part of the encounter, we talk about communicating the pediatric BMI, what words to use and not use, go over some of those studies, and so on and so forth. And so these are just the highlights of what you'll see in the toolkit. That's part 2. And then the motivational interviewing part, the diet history for pediatric obesity, and how to get buy-in for a follow-up appointment. So those are the things you can expect. All right. And so that's so that's it for me. That was the presentation. I really appreciate you guys listening. I know it was long and there's mixed media, so I appreciate everyone following along. I think we had a great, robust discussion, but if anyone has any questions, this is the time.
Well, I just want to say that the we here that Sejal keeps referring to is really her. She did an incredible job of, first of all, the innovation of using podcasts. I just thought it was absolutely brilliant for busy people and students, residents, using it for CME, whatever. It's easy access.